Hi, I'm Nav from Vectric Support. This is the perfect dice tower, so let's hop into the software and take a look at how I made it. Okay, now that we're in the software, let's set up our job sheet. So the first thing we need to do is make it a double-sided job. That's because we're going to be cutting the underside of the lid and the top side, so we've got a double-sided. The width in this case is 219 millimeters, the height is 381, the thickness is 30, the units are of course in millimeters. The Z0 position, I'll be using the material surface, so every time I come to Z0 on the machine, I'll do it off the material surface. The XY datum is in the bottom left position for my CNC, so do change this if your CNC is different. And for the flip between sides, I've gone for a horizontal flip. For the modeling resolution, I'm using very high, although we're not technically using a model in this one, it's still good to have this so you can see what it looks like on the software. All right, so with that all set up, let's click on OK. I actually want to create a duplicate sheet, and the reason for this is because I want to ensure that I've got a sheet to set up my rolling tray that you can see in front of me to the left here, and one sheet for the rolling tower, which is on the right hand side here. So we're going to go over to the Sheets tab, so we'll just click on the left hand side here, and I'm just going to right mouse click onto sheet 1 here and click Add New, and while I'm at this I'm going to rename each sheet. So let's right mouse click, rename, we'll call this one Dice Tower Roller, nice and clear as to what that sheet is for, and we'll call sheet 2 the Dice Tray, so we'll just rename that as well. Wonderful. So that is our sheet setup for the moment. What we're going to do first is look at the underside of the dice roller here, so the actual rolling mechanism itself. Okay, so to do that we need to draw a rectangle. Now in totality, the actual tray itself and the lids together, there will be 178 millimeters wide, which means that each half of the lid that we're cutting will be 89 millimeters. So let's make a rectangle that is 89 millimeters. So let's go to the Draw Rectangle tool. And I'm going to anchor my point in the bottom left here to X0, Y0. And this will be important for lining up in a bit. So the width in this case will be 89 millimeters and the height will be 254 millimeters. So let's click on Create. And you can see because I anchored it in the bottom left here, is anchored the actual rectangle drawing from that bottom left area. Okay, so we can close that out for just the moment, and we are going to offset this inwards so we can create a kind of border around the inside edge of our tower roller here. So we're going to go to Offset and Layout in the bottom left, click on Offset and Layout, and we're going to go inwards and left by 12.7 millimeters. And this is the measurement I came up with by doing some tests beforehand, so I know this is the right amount for this scenario. Okay, so let's click on Offset after selecting our vector. Wonderful, and that is now essentially our tower frame set up. Now, it's a good idea to use layers here because layers help you organize your files and also organize your vectors. So while we've got our vectors on the screen here, so let's left mouse click and let's drag a box over them to select them. And then we're going to right mouse click and we're going to move to Layer, and we're going to call this new layer Tower Frame. Okay, and the color is going to be black for this one. So let's click on OK. Now while I'm here, I'm also going to draw the rectangle for our dice tray. So let's pop over to our other sheet. I'm just going to double left mouse click onto our other sheet in the view here. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to make the tower twice the width of our lids. So we know our lid is 89 millimeters across, so that means it needs to be 178. So let's draw that rectangle. So let's pop it to Draw Rectangle. Again, use the bottom left datum point as your anchor, and 178. Click on Create. Wonderful. And again, we will also offset this by 12.7 millimeters. So again, come over to Offset and Layout, click on Offset, and just like that, we have our setup for our dice tray. And again, we'll put these on their own layer as well. So we'll right mouse click and we'll go to Move to Layer, and we'll pop it onto layer 1, but we're going to rename layer 1 at the top here. So we'll click on that, click on Rename, and we will call this one Tray Frame. Okay, so we've got a nice obvious name for it, and we'll also change the color of that maybe to a red, so it's nice and clear that is different. Let's pop back over to our dice roller sheet. Okay, so what we're now going to have a look at is actually creating the ramp elements that are inside of our tower. Now the reason this is important is because we need to make sure that the dice have enough room to roll into the actual tower element itself, so that the dice are, or have enough room to roll both between each ramp, but also from the edge of the ramp to the edge of the actual box here itself. Now this is important because you need to measure your dice. So I've got a set of calipers here and I've measured my dice from point to point, okay? So that is the widest it will be. And keep in mind, because it's a set of polyhedral dice in this case, that's 7 dice usually, you have different variances of dice. And you can see how much taller this is compared to a D20. This is a D10. But you can see this is quite a bit taller here. So I made sure to measure each one of these so I have plenty of room when I come to create my ramps for them to roll through. So with that in mind, let's start creating our ramps. Okay, so what we're going to do is draw a rectangle. So let's pop over to the draw rectangle tool again. And I'm just going to use the anchor point of my tower here to help me draw this. And I'm just going to left mouse click, drag out till it pops the other anchor point. And you can see on the worksheet here, I've got a width and a height value. I want my height to be around 5 mil or 6 mil, something like that. So 5.5 is actually quite nice. I'm going to let go. And the reason for that is because I don't want it to be too thick, as I mentioned earlier, so the dice can roll through without any issues. So what I'm just going to do now is kind of roughly position this to where I want it. So I want it kind of overlapping this edge here. And I'm going to use this blue rotation handle to rotate this so I can get the kind of angle for the rolling that I want. So you can see it's starting to take shape, but clearly this is not enough room here to get the dice through. So let's reduce the shape a little bit. Let's just zoom in and we'll pull that ramp in just a little bit there. Okay, and now what we can do is use our measurements to aid us. So if we come over to the measure tool, which is just over here under edit objects, I'm going to measure the distance from this edge here to this edge here. And I can see that it's currently 30 millimeters. That's plenty of room for the dice to get through. So that's already a good start. So I'm quite happy with that. So with that in mind, I'm going to now make a copy of this. So I'm going to press Control Shift and H to make a horizontal copy. You can see it's flipped it over there. And I'm just going to drag this one into a rough placeholder just on the left-hand side here. And again, I'm going to measure between these ramps to make sure that there's enough room for the dice to roll through. So let's go from the very tip here down to the top of this ramp here. So that's 46 mil, plenty of room for my dice. And again, I can measure from the edge here to the edge here. Wonderful, 29 millimeters. And that's great because I know in this case, my D20, for example, is 25 mil tip to tip. Okay, so finally, I'm going to make another ramp, and that is going to be the exit. So we've got one for the entrance, one for it to roll again, and then we're going to have an exit ramp here as well. So let's select our top ramp. We'll hold Control and Shift, and I'm just going to left mouse click and drag a copy of this one. And I'm just going to let go around here, and I'm going to elongate this one so it exits all the way through the tower here. So wonderful, that goes past the edge. So we're serving two purposes here, because what we're having is a ramp for the dice to exit, but also underneath that, we've got this big pocket we're going to form here to store our dice. So with that in mind, we've got a kind of rough setup here for our ramps. We should really put these on their own layer so they're separated and we can use them if we need to come back to them later if we make a mistake at all. So let's left mouse click while holding Shift, right mouse click, and we're going to move to a layer, new layer, and we're going to call this one Tower Ramps. Okay, and we'll give this a different color. Let's go for a orange, and let's click on OK. Now the benefit of this is now that we have a copy of these vectors for later if we do make any mistakes. So with that in mind, I'm actually now going to select all of our vectors. So left mouse click and drag, and I'm going to copy these vectors, this time not move. So copy to layer, new layer. I'm going to call this one Tower Build. Because now what we're going to do is take all the vectors that we've just made and now start building them into the actual one unit of the roller element here. So I'll give this a nice green color. Let's click on OK. And let's start turning off the layers that we don't need for the moment. So we don't need the tower frame on this sheet. We don't need the ramps for the moment. We're going to be using this as the active layer. So let's double left mouse click to make sure that is the active layer. Wonderful. Okay. So now that we've got our ramp set up, let's look at trimming away some of these elements to make sure the vectors are all lined up. And we're also going to add in a gap here for the entrance and an exit here for our dice to exit through. So again, we're going to go back to the draw rectangle tool. And this time what we're going to do is hover our mouse until we snap to this corner here. Left mouse click, drag until we snap to this corner here. And then we're just going to drag this vector just past the top here. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to make sure that when we come to cut this, the end mill cuts past that so we get a lovely clean finish for our entrance. And we're going to do the same with the exit. So we're going to come to here, we're going to snap to this point just here where the ramp meets the inside frame here. Left mouse click, and then we can drag down to this ramp, and we can drag it out. In fact, I'm going to drag it down to the tip of the ramp here, and we'll just drag that out. Wonderful, now we have our exit here as well, and now we can start trimming away our vectors to actually make this all come together. Okay, so to do that, let's go to Edit Objects, click on this icon here, which is a pair of scissors, and we're going to start trimming away these vectors. Now it's important to have the rejoin trim sections on, because this will mean that when we trim away these sections, the vectors will be then rejoined again to make a solid vector. Okay, so with that in mind, let's zoom in so we can see nice and clearly what we're working with. And we're going to get rid of this section just here and cut away this section here. Wonderful, so now the ramp's part of the frame. Now we need to have a think about how we're going to do this. So we need to get rid of this one. In fact, we'll Control Z and get rid of this one first. And then we'll go back in and get rid of this one here. So what was actually happening there is the software had an overlap of vectors, and it was trying to make a decision as to which one to delete, because one is on top and one is on the bottom. And in that case, it made the decision to delete that entire area. But as we can see, we can just easily go back, Control Z, and we can rectify that. So we need to get rid of this section just here at the top as well. Okay, so that's our entrance. And now what we need to do is come down and start deleting these elements for our exit. So we can get rid of this section just here, and then we can get rid of this section just here. Wonderful. And we'll start to build up our ramp here. Okay. And we'll start to clean up this area. So we'll really zoom in to make sure that nothing is missed. And we just get rid of that vector there. And finally, we can get rid of this section just here. Okay, and so now that is effectively our pocket set up. So what we can do now is have a look at adding in some magnets to actually make sure that our rolling element sticks together. So you can see over here, I've got my rolling tray, and you can see I've put some magnets in, and these will help the lids stick together. So let's have a look at how we get those into the software. So I'll just pop that back down over here for the moment. And I know in this case, I'm actually using 5mm by 2mm neodymium magnets. Now, the 5mm is actually the diameter of the width of the magnet in this case. And I'm going to use the layer to my advantage here, and I'm going to turn back on my tower frame, because what we can do is, using these vectors, is create a corner square that will help us align our magnets. So if I go back over to the draw rectangle tool for the moment, we're going to snap our pointer over this corner here and just drag it out until it meets that corner over there. Wonderful. So now we've got effectively an alignment square. And we're going to go into the draw circle tool. So let's come over to the left hand side and click on draw circle. And the diameter, as I mentioned, is 5mm. So we hover our mouse in the middle of this square, and because the software now knows we've got this square to align to, it's picked up that this is the middle of it, so we can just simply left mouse click, and there we are, we have a magnet. Now we need to get the magnets into the other corners. Now what's a really simple way of doing so? Well, the software makes a really easy way to do this, which is to mirror it. So I'm just going to create some polylines first to show you how we can take advantage of that mirror tool. So let's go over to Draw Polyline, and I'm going to just hover my mouse until it snaps to the midpoint of this tower, and I'm just going to pop one down all the way to the bottom there. Press space on the keyboard, and then we'll find the midpoint horizontally of this tower. Now I can see here it gives me a Y value of 127, which is half of 254. So if you're ever unsure, you can look at the Y value there on the screen as well. So nice and dynamic for you. Wonderful. Now these lines will inform our flipping for our magnets. So with that in mind, let's click on our magnet, and we're going to go over to this tool here under Transform Objects, which is Mirror Selected Objects. And you can see there's this option here which says Flip About Job Center, but underneath that there's Flip About Line. So we haven't selected a line yet, so let's left mouse click while holding Shift to click on the line we want to flip about, and that becomes available, and we want to create a mirrored copy, so make sure you have that checked. Click Flip About Line, and there you go. Just like that, we have an aligned magnet, and we're going to do the same for the rest of these. So we'll go with this line here, and again, this line just here. Wonderful. And now we have some magnets into our corners. We can delete out our alignment lines for the moment. And I'm going to turn off our tower frame, and I will actually insert one more magnet because I think it'd be a good idea to have another magnet here just for a little bit of extra strength for the lid. I'm just going to delete the corner alignment square as well. We don't need that anymore. And we'll go back into our draw circle tool. So I can use this as the alignment for the previous circle. So if I just drag down, and I can pop that in place. I can also actually just use a vector value as well. So there is a value I can just pop in here. So for example, if I know the X point in this case is 6.35, I can put it on that X point, and I can give it a Y point down here of 175, for example. So if I put 175, click on create, and that puts that magnet in alignment with the other magnet from the top there. Now finally, we just need to put our magnets on their own layer so they're all separated and nice and easy for us to work with. So let's hold Shift while selecting our magnets, and we'll right mouse click. We're going to move to layer, new layer, and we'll call this one tower magnets. So it's nice and clear as to where they are present. We'll put these into blue and click OK. And now we have effectively our tower pocket set up for tool pathing, as well as our magnets set up for tool pathing as well. Now, while I'm here, I'm actually going to take advantage of some of these vectors to simulate onto my other sheet for my dice tower here. Because what we're going to be doing now is, in a moment, we'll be looking at the top side of this lid. But what we've effectively done is created the underside of that. So everything that you can see here on my hands is now effectively finished in the software. We just need to make a copy of it on the left-hand side, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Let's just clean up this vector just a little bit. We've got this little extra bit here we can delete, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And now we have a pocket here that we can use to store our dice. Now we need to simulate this to the other sheet, and the reason for this is because these need to line up with the same pocket on the other side. Now if you think about it, we're looking at this from the underside, which means we need to flip it when it goes onto the actual rolling element over here. So I'm just going to right mouse click on this vector. I'm going to choose copy to sheet, and I'm going to go for dice tray. And you'll notice this is in the bottom right hand corner, also the bottom left hand corner here. And the reason for that, and the reason why I lined up my rectangles to be in the XY dating position of 0, 0, is because then I can align these. So now what I've done is effectively, if I'm copying this to the other sheet, I know they're in line with each other. So even if I move these vectors around now, and I come to put the actual vectors in the middle of the worksheet, it's not a big deal because I've already lined them up, so I know they're in the right position. So we're good to go. All right, so let's get back onto our underside here, and we're going to actually make a copy of this. So we're just going to turn on our tower frame, our ramps, and we're just going to take the whole lot of this, left mouse click with our mouse and drag over to select the whole lot, click on it again, and we are just going to drag this up a bit and in a bit. Now the reason for this is because in a moment I'm going to make a copy of this, but I just want to make sure that I've got enough room for my end mill to kind of pass around when I come to tool pathing. I was really only using that bottom corner for alignment, so now that that's done, I can take advantage of my worksheet here. So we're going to turn off our frames, we're going to turn off the frame for the moment as well, and what we can do is have a look at flipping this onto the right hand side. In fact, we will turn on our frame for this one because we'll make sure we have a copy for the other side of it. Okay, so let's left mouse click and drag. And then what I can do is on the keyboard, press Control, Shift, and H, and that flips a copy. So just like that, and we now have the underside effectively completed. We just need to do some tool pathing in a bit. But before we get to that, let's look at creating the top side element here. So you can see this lovely, almost feather-like griffin effect for the texture on top of this lid. So how do we get that? Well, let's look at creating that in the software. So let's turn off our magnets layer for the moment. Let's turn off our tower builds for just a moment, because what I want to do is copy the frame to the other side. So left mouse click, and in fact, while I'm looking at this, I can just about see that the gap here might be a little bit too small for my end mill. So again, we'll use the measuring tool to our advantage here, and we'll see how big this gap is between them. Okay, so what I will do actually is I'll just turn back on our layers, and we'll just shift this one to the left with our keyboard, just 1, 2, and we'll do the same with this one, 1, 2. Just really want to make sure that my end mill has enough room to move through here, because we will be putting some dowels into this to help our flipping method later. So I just want to really make sure that we've got enough room for everything. Okay, so let's go back to our layers. Let's turn off our ramps, and we're going to turn off our build, and we're going to keep the tower frame on. So let's make that the active layer. We're going to left mouse click, hold shift, left mouse click, and then right mouse click, copy to other side. And so what that's now done, if we click this button at the top here to flip between the top and the bottom sides, is created the frame on the other side for our lid. So we know they're going to line up. So this is really important, because when we come to actually flip this on the machine, we need to make sure that we cut everything out in alignment so that the lid isn't skew-if. So let's put these onto their own layer. So let's select both of those, right mouse click, we'll move to layer, and let's call this new layer tower lid. And let's give this a different color. Let's go for a much brighter blue, so it's very obvious as to what this layer is. And you can see in the background here, there's a kind of a lighter, kind of almost teal color. That is actually the top side or the back side of this project. So you can see the tower frame on the other side here. All right, so we're just gonna make sure our tower lid is the active layer. And now what we're going to do is import some vectors. Now I've gone to the liberty of creating some vectors for you that you can use in this case. So if you come over to import a bitmap or vectors, you'll have these provided to you. And this is going to be the shell full pattern EPS file. So I'm just going to double left mouse click that to bring it in. And you can see we kind of got this scaly shell-like effect, but to me it reminds me of griffin feathers. If you look at like a griffin feather chest for any type of fantasy artwork, it almost has this kind of effect. So what we're going to do with this is we are going to just click it while it's still here. We'll move it onto its own layer, always keeping everything nice and organized. So move to new layer, or in fact, actually it has its own layer, so we'll just rename this one. So we'll rename this one to Griffin Feathers. Okay, and we'll leave this one black for now, so they are selected. And we're just going to move these up in alignment with the box. Okay, so roughly aligning them kind of where the box is, where we want them to be. And now what we're going to do is trim these vectors to the boundary of that box. So how do we do that? We come over to Edit Objects, we go to the Trim Selected Objects to Last Selected Object tool. So just like the tool says, we're going to be trimming the objects that we've selected to the last one that we select. So we need to hold Shift, select the object we need to trim to, which is our border, and then we're going to clear outside that boundary. Okay, so let's click on Clear and let's see what happens. So right now the software is having a bit of a think about it, collecting the vector and component data, and so it's going to start then trimming around that boundary here to get rid of any elements outside of that border. Now what we're going to do again is actually use the mirroring option here to copy this to the other side as well. So instead of having to do this twice, we can just do it with one time and then flip it to the other side as well. So let's have a look at doing that. So if we take our element here, we can do Control Shift H, and just like that, our lids are set up. So now we've got our vectors all in their individual layers. We've got our lids with the vectors on. So now what we need to have a look at is doing some tool pathing. So this is the exciting part. So with that in mind, let's just go to Zoom or Active View to Drawing Limits. and we're going to follow my mouse pointer to the top left of the software here, and we're going to switch over to the toolpath commands. Okay, so the first one I want to make is this lovely texture. Okay, so what we can do here is use a V-carving. You can also, in this scenario, if you've got some vectors that are open, you can actually use a profile toolpath with a V-bit tool and set it to on, and that will cut on it. But let's have a look at using V-carving for now. So let's go up to the Griffin Feathers layer here. You can actually right mouse click this one, and you can click on select layer vectors. So instead of you having to individually go through and select each vector, you can just use that real simple tip there just to make your life a bit easier. Okay, so let's go back into the V-carve toolpath here. And in this case, I'm going to use a flat depth of 0.2. So what I'm telling the software here is I want you to only cut down to 0.2 maximum effectively. I only want to kind of carve in just a little bit of a groove here, because when we come to pocket the other side of this, we're going to be losing a lot of material. So the last thing we want to do is machine too much away from the top. And the tool in this case we want to use is a 60-degree 1/4 inch V-bit. Now, these tool settings are safe and appropriate for my machine after thorough testing. I highly recommend that for any tooling that you see in this file, double check that it's safe and appropriate for your machine. And of course, change tools where you need to. If you don't have access to the same tools that I do here, do make sure you change those, okay? So let's close that out. And we'll call this one V-carve feathers. So it's nice and clear as to what it is. Click on calculate, and we can have a look at what that looks like in the software currently for the preview. Wonderful. So what I can see here is that the V-carving is going to be carving the groove just like we wanted. Okay, so let's have a look at what that preview looks like. And that is very nice. But I think we can darken this up a little bit to get an almost texture-like effect like you can see over here. So with that in mind, we're going to go back into the 2D view, and we're going to use a laser toolpath. So what we're going to do this time is use a laser cut and fill. And I've got a 6-watt laser here. Again, I tested this one on my machine, so safe and sound for my machine. Make sure you set your laser up correctly, that the kerf is all correct for your particular laser. But this time I'm going to use a hatch fill with a step over of 0.25 millimeters, 45-degree angle, fill it regionally, and I'm going to just make sure that I rename this one to laser feathers. And we're just going to have a look at what this looks like currently. Okay, so we're just going to click on calculate. And what we'll do is have a look at the preview. And this is where the preview really comes in handy, because if there's anything that you don't like here or that you want to readjust, the preview is quite powerful in letting you do that, because it shows you exactly what it should look like on the machine. Now in this case, I'm really happy. That is a lovely darkened effect there. So it's gone in between where we've carved there and just darkened it up. It gives that lovely kind of almost rustic kind of high fantasy feel to this lid. So I'm quite happy with that. So let's have a look at making a cutout pass. So let's grab our outline border here, and we'll left mouse click while holding shift to select the other one. And we'll go for a profile. Now in this case, what I can do is click Z equals, and it'll tell me the exact thickness of my material. But I actually want half of that, because I want to reduce the stress on the tool, and I want to make sure that when I cut through, for any mistakes, I can cut through halfway, and then I can just see when I come to align it if there's any mistakes. So it's just a good safety option here. So I can do Z/2 equals, and that will effectively do a formula that is what is half of Z, which is 30 in this case, which is 15. And that gives me my cut depth. Now, in this case, I'm using a 1/4 inch M mill. Again, these are safe and appropriate for my machine. I'm going to cut outside right, and in this case, I am going to add some tabs. So let's click on Add Tabs to Toolpath. Let's go to Edit Tabs. We're going to have a constant number of 4 tabs. So let's add those in, and let's see what the software does. Now, this is a really important step, because what we need to think about here is where's the exit for our dice roller? It's just here, right? So we need to make sure that the tabs aren't on the exit, because when we come to cut this out, the tab won't be there, because there will be no material there, because the pocket's already cut it out. So with that in mind, we can flip over, we can have a look, and we can kind of surmise if we turn on our layers for the tower build here. We don't want a tab around the middle here, okay, because that's going to be cut away. So let's flip back over to the other side. And now that we can see that, we'll click on the Add Tabs. Oh, my apologies, let's just select our vectors. So let's just make sure our vectors are selected. There we go. And you can see here the pocket Over here is an exit, so let's get rid of that tab there and let's place it in a more appropriate place, maybe up here. And we'll do the same on this side. Wonderful, and we'll do the same with that. And those are much more beneficial placements for our tabs. So we can close that out. We can click on calculate, and we can call this one cut out lid. And let's have a look at the preview for that toolpath. Wonderful, and you can see the tabs there, and you can see that it's not cut all the way through because I've only told it to cut halfway. And then what we can now do is have a look at the toolpath on the other side, and then we can have a look at the full preview all together. So let's close up the preview form for just a moment. We're going to go back to the 2D view. We'll come up to this button at the very top of the software, and we will flip between our sides. And we will turn to our tower build. So we're just going to make that the active layer. And I'm just going to turn off tower frame for the moment. So I've just got my pockets here because these are the pockets I need to machine out. So I'm just going to go for a pocket toolpath and hold shift and select all the areas that I want to pocket down. Now I'm actually going to go down 22 millimeters because we've got 30 mil of material here. So 22 millimeters is quite a lot, but the reason I'm going for it is because it gives plenty of room for when we put the lids together for the dice to roll through. So you have lots of room for the dice to get through, so potentially even get multiple dice through at once. So again, we're going to use our 1/4" end mill. I haven't changed the settings for these. These are the same as earlier, so that's all good. Now in this case, you need to ask yourself what you want to use, whether it's an offset or a raster. Now with an offset, you might get some markings where the tool will effectively machine from the middle out. And sometimes you can get some markings. And the same with the raster. What you need to think about with your raster strategy is your step over, because the last thing you want is to have a large step over. And then effectively what you'll get is these kind of almost ridges where the machine cuts and then there's a step over and it cuts. So you need to really think about your machining time here, because your smaller step over means more machining time. So really have a think about the strategy that's going to work for you. And in this case, you can use a test cut here. This is the best time to use one to iron those things out. In this case, I am going to go to a raster, and I will go to my tool and I'll just edit the step over and I'll make it a really small one in this case. So let's click on OK. And I'm going to call this one Pocket Roller or Pockets Roller, so I know exactly what it's for. Let's click on Calculate and let's preview that toolpath. And you can see here now it's doing these in multiple passes. Now, in your case, depending on your CNC machine and the tool that you've got, you might want to go for less passes if your CNC machine can handle that type of stress on the tool. In my case, I wanted to be really careful because I didn't want to put too much stress on the tool. So in this case, I've opted for a much more safe option for my pockets by adding in a couple of extra passes. So you can see here we've got the pocket at the bottom here, and that will be where we can store our dice. So nice and portable there for us. And you can see now that we've cut this out, if I just bring over this element here, we get a nice clean edge with this pocket cut because it is now cutting past that edge. You can see in the software there. So you get this lovely clean element of a cut past here, because what we don't want to risk is when we cut out our pockets, if we go right up to the edge, potentially some little bits of just very, very, very thin bits of wood could be left. And the last thing we want to do is make more work for cleanup where we could potentially cause a design to have any sort of errors. So that's why I've got that extra little bit there. You can dynamically adjust the view here as well for your 3D view. So if you ever want to see what's going on, you can right mouse click and drag the view around so you can see what everything looks like. You can zoom in as well. And so as I mentioned earlier, we were thinking about, with the raster, we're worried about those markings, but you can see because I've put such a tiny step over on that one, it's not really that relevant here because the step over isn't as large as it would have been, which is 40% I think I had on the tool originally. So we're just waiting for the pockets here to finish up, and then we're going to move on to making our magnets. And I should point out at this stage, with our magnets, you really need to have a think about what your glue gap is going to be. Because with needling magnets, because they are quite small, you could go for a friction fit and try and make the hole itself just about the right size so we can get these in. But in my case, I'm going to use some super glue to make sure that they really are stuck in properly and to make sure that everything is a-okay. And we'll just pop back over to the 2D view here. And just to point out on the 3D view, you can see here now through the top and the sides where our cutout path on the back side, on the lid side, has cut through. And you can see actually that one of the tabs has been cut through. So this is why the preview is also really useful, because now already we've spotted a mistake we can get rid of, which is to place that tab perhaps somewhere else where that entry point isn't, so we can get rid of that and put that tab somewhere else. So like I was saying about the magnets, let's go to the magnet layers and let's click on that. And what we're going to do here is create a pocket for these layers. So let's right mouse click onto the magnet layer. Let's go for select layer vectors, close that out, click on pocket toolpath. I'm going to use an 1/8" end mill here. And in this case, as I was saying earlier, you really want to think about the glue gap, because what we can do here is add in a pocket allowance. Now, it's important with the allowance you get the positive and negative values right here. In this case, it's going to be a negative value. It's going to be minus 0.2. So what that's going to do is just cut a slight bit bigger than the current pocket. So it's not going to be 5 mil exactly. It's going to be 5.2 effectively. It just means that when we come to push on our magnets, they will go in, and there's a bit of room for the glue to also adhere to it. But more importantly, you're not affecting the wood around it. So you don't want to push it in and then come to find out on your lovely finished project that you've now made an error and scuffed the wood. So it just gives you a little bit of room for error there. So let's click on this and call this one pocket magnets. In fact, let's call it pocket roller magnet, so it's nice and clear. And we'll preview that toolpath. Lovely, we've got our magnets in place, and the last thing we need to do is to get our cutout pass. So this is where we need to turn back on our tower frame, and we're going to go for a profile just like we did on the other side. We're using the exact same settings. So let's select our vectors here, and again, let's add in our tabs, click on edit tabs. We want a constant number of 4. Let's add those tabs in. And again, now we thought about this, right? We know where our exit and entrance is going to be. So let's get rid of those tabs on this side and this side. And what we can do is pop them there, and then perhaps one down here instead, and one down here instead, okay? You might not need 4 tabs in the end, you could just use 3, but in this case, I'm just being extra safe. I'm gonna call this one roller cutout, and I can click on calculate. I can preview that toolpath. And as you can see, we've got our tabs here. And that's cut through. And like I said, you can see that the tabs almost line up on the back side here. It's not too much of a big deal. I can saw those off with a bit of finishing, so it's not too bad. But you can see why the preview is so important. Already we've spotted that we don't need a tab at the top there. We need to put it somewhere else. And you can see how building this up bit by bit allows you to see where, before you go to machining, you need to amend anything if you need to. But with that in place, I'm very happy with that. Everything looks as intended. So we can now have a look at making the actual roller element over here on my left-hand side. So let's pop back into the 2D view. We'll just close down the preview for the moment, and we'll just zoom to the active view. So over here we can see our rolling tray. Now what we're going to be looking at in a moment is getting these pockets all sorted on our sheet over here, and also more importantly this lovely rustic looking effect. Now this is actually a sketch carving, laser sketch carving to be clear, and this is actually done off a 3D model, and it's a really cool effect. So let's have a look at how we achieve that. So let's just pop that down, and we're going to hop back into the software. So now that we're back in the software, we need to have a bit of a think about how we're going to approach this sheet. So let's just double left mouse click onto the dice tray sheet. Now I'm going to just left mouse click, drag, and bring this all into the center a little bit. So just drag that up a little bit. Wonderful. And let's get some layer organization going on as well. So I'm going to move this singular pocket here to its own layer. And we're going to call this one tray pockets. Okay, because there's actually going to be multiple of these in just a moment. And we're going to turn that into a purple color. So let's click OK. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that this is flipped, because currently what we're looking at is the lid's underside on the left-hand side here in the software. So we need to make sure that when we put the lid on, that the pocket is facing the other way on the tray, because it needs to line up, okay? So how we do that is we need to flip this by literally just clicking H on the keyboard while it's selected, and that's it. Simple as that. We've now got our pocket flipped. Now we need to make a copy of this pocket on the other side. So again, we'll use the tools that we did earlier. So let's pop over to the design commands, and I'm just going to click on the draw polyline tool. And again, I'm going to put in a line for the center of our tray here. We'll do the same across it horizontally. So we know in this case it's 254 tall, but we're just going to find the middle point here, pop that across there. We'll need that for the magnets later. Okay, so let's close that out, and we will come to our pocket down here, and we'll come over to the mirror selected objects tool. We're going to use a flip about line again. So hold shift, select your vertical line, flip about line. Wonderful. We now have our pockets lined up. I'm just going to put these alignment vectors onto our own layer as well, so I can get rid of them in just a moment. So let's go to new layer and call these alignment vectors. Click on OK. We'll turn those off, make the tray pockets the active layer. And then what I'm going to do is take this inner pocket, and I'm going to just drag it up a bit, because this is going to make the kind of shield-like effect we can see on the tray over here. So click on that vector. Let's just drag it up into a rough position that we like. About there is fine. And then I'm going to zoom in here so we can see what I'm doing with node editing. So while I've got the vector selected, press N on the keyboard for node editing. And then we're going to just hover over this point here. You see the mouse cursor changes. I'm going to left mouse click this node and just drag it down. Now I'm going to drag it to a point which I like the look of, which is about there. So taking some artistic liberty here, but it's not too important about the kind of exact angle of this. This is just to help me draw out my shield shape. So with that in mind, I can exit by pressing escape from node editing. I'm going to move this onto the pockets layer as well. So move to layer, and we'll call this one to tray pockets. So tray pockets is now the active layer. Fantastic. And now let's build up our shield. So quick and easy, go over to the draw arc tool under create vectors. I'm going to pick a point at the bottom here, and I'm going to drag it up to a point around here where I'm happy with. So maybe about here, and then just start building out that shield shape. So I can just hover my mouse out like this, and then when I'm happy with it, click on the page again, all good. And now what I can do is turn back on my alignment vectors, go over to the mirror selected objects tool, hold shift with my vertical vector, flip about line, and just like that we have some shield vectors. Now let's get to trimming so we can make this shield all one piece. And we'll go over to the trim tool again, and we'll just get rid of this section, zoom in, get rid of that, get rid of this, and just like that we have our shield. Now we need to make that lovely design for the sketch carving. Now this is actually a design and make model that we'll be using here. Now it's actually included in this file, but there's also another version of it which is a Phoenix. Highly recommend you check that out, because if you want to make a different version of this, you can do. So for example, instead of griffin feathers, maybe you've got a bitmap image of some flames, but you can use a sketch carving toolpath on that bitmap to make a flame-like effect on the front of this lid. So do have a play around, and I do suggest looking at design and make. If any of these models take your fancy, you can purchase them on there as well. But in this case, you're getting this model in this file, and it is our griffin model. So let's go over to the clipart tab, and we're going to click on design and make, because I've already downloaded and installed it. And we're going to scroll down till we find our griffin. I'm just going to left mouse click, drag that onto our worksheet, let go. Wonderful. There is our griffin in all its glory. I'm just going to move it into our position here, and I'm just going to size it down just a wee bit. I'm going to hold shift on the keyboard and just size it down just a little bit more, and then just press down on the keyboard to shift it into place. And wonderful. And the last thing we need to do is make some magnets. So let's pop on our alignment vectors again, and this time we're going to add a new layer, and we're going to call this layer, let's call this one tray magnets, and we'll give it a color, and this time we'll go for a light green. And again, we can use the box method to align this all up. So draw our little box in the top corner. Let's just make sure tray magnets is the active layer. There you go. Let's get our diameter of tool ready. So we've got a 5mm magnet. Beautiful. And again, we'll use our mirror selected objects tool to mirror it to the other side. So let's do that. So let's select our line, flip it, select our horizontal line, we'll flip it, and finally the vertical line, and we flip once more, and that is our magnets all ready to go. Now, at the moment, I really do like the griffin design, but I think it could use just a little bit of extra flair. Now, what I'm thinking about here is there's a beautiful ribbon in the middle of it, and I think if we go to the 3D view, while it does look fantastic, I think it'd be really cool if we could get some text on there and another kind of high fantasy tabletop RPG symbol. And in my case, I think a D20 or a 20-sided dice would be a wonderful addition. So let's go over to the 2D view. We'll work on the text first. So let's go for the text tool over under Create Vectors. Now in this case, I'm using this really lovely Old English text. It's very Gothic-like feel to it, very high fantasy. Of course, if you're maybe in more sci-fi or anything like that, there's plenty of fonts to choose from here. So, do have a play around with these. But for now, I'm going to type in my font words, and I'm going to go for as above, so below. So I'll do the as above bit first. I'm going to hold shift, and I'm just going to drag this handle out to make this a bit smaller. Place it roughly on the ribbon where I want it. And I'm going to use this blue rotation handle to kind of rotate this till I'm happy with the placement. Okay, now let's just size that down just a wee bit, and we'll drag it into place. That is looking good. Just size down just a little bit more. Just a wee bit more. Wonderful. And I'm just going to shift that using the right arrow key on my keyboard, then down. Great, I'm actually really happy with that placement. So now what we're going to do is add in a new text layer. It's going to be the so below part. So below. And again, we'll just size that down a little bit. Oh, let me just select that again. In fact, we'll just close out the tool for now. We don't need that anymore. And we'll just size it down, drag it into rough position. Let's zoom in so we can see what we're working with. Again, grab the blue rotation angle, and we'll just pop that in there, rotate it back a little bit more, size it down just a little bit more as well. That's far too much. And there we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to have a look at the text side by side, and I'm actually going to size it down just a little bit more to match the other text, because we don't want this to look bigger than that one, and that to me looks about correct. Okay, so in fact maybe just a teeny tiny bit more. There we go. Wonderful. So now I've got my text. You know what, let's put these on its own layer as well. So it's onto their own layer. And it just means that if we ever make any mistakes, at least the vectors are on their own individual layers, and then we can come back and correct them as and when needed, because we can copy these to other layers and move them about, but it always means you've got a hard copy of it somewhere, just in case you need them later. Now I did mention a D20. Now I've actually supplied you with a DXF file here, so what we're going to do is go over to the top left and click on this icon here for import a bitmap or vectors from a file. And it's this D20 DXF file, so I'm just going to double left mouse click to bring that in. And wonderful, you can see my D20 vectors here. Let's just select that and let's just size it down a little bit and bring that in line with this circle in the middle, just like that. And wonderful, we have our D20 in the middle there as well. So now what we can start doing is looking at toolpathing. So again, we'll go over to zoom to active view. We're just going to go over to the top left and click on switch toolpath commands. Now, it's a good time to check your material setup, because before we go to actually save out our toolpaths and create a toolpath, it's always good to just check your material setup just for sanity's sake and make sure everything as is intended. So we know my thickness is 30 mil, we know my XY datum is in the bottom left, my Z0 is off the top here. Model position doesn't really matter in this case because we're not actually machining the model, we'll be laser sketch carving it. The gaps above material for the clearance and plunge, as well as the Z gap in this case, are all safe and sound for my particular machine, but do double check these for your particular CNC machine. All right, so with that in mind, let's get to some toolpathing. So let's get our pockets done first. And I'm going to select my pockets over here. And again, we're going to go 22 mil. We're going to use the 1/4 inch that we used earlier. And we'll call this one pocket tray. And again, have a think about whether you're going to raster or offset it, as I mentioned earlier. So if we're going to do the raster, I'm going to reduce the step over quite a bit. This will increase my machining time, but in this case, I think it's worth it. And let's click on calculate. Wonderful. So I'm just going to preview that very quickly. Wonderful, there's our pocket toolpath all ready to go. Now let's go back to the 2D view and we're going to go for magnets. So again, we can use our layer advantage here to go for trade magnets, and we can right mouse click, select all layer vectors, so it selects them for us, makes our life a lot easier. So we'll just remove the 1/4 inch there, we'll go for the 1/8 inch. And again, we're going to add in that little pocket allowance just to make the fit for the magnets a bit easier on ourselves. And we'll call this one tray magnets. Wonderful, let's click on calculate and we'll just preview these toolpaths. That's great. And then this is the exciting bit. We now get to have a look at the griffin and looking at what it looks like as a sketch carving. So let's select our model and we're going to go over to this icon here for laser sketch carving. Now in this case, I'm using my 6-watt laser from before again. And let me just check all the settings for that are appropriate. Yes, indeed. And then power is 50%. It's a 3D model, so making sure I've got the selection set to 3D model. In this case, I'm using the model boundary. So what this means is the laser will only go up to the boundary of the model itself. I won't go past that, so it's only going to be machining on that laser boundary. I'm going to use a line thickness of 4. Now, the reason I'm using 4 is because it will pick enough detail out of the griffin that I won't lose any detail with lines kind of blurring into each other. If you go too thick, what you can risk is some of the, for example, where the feathers are, you might get really thick lines, they kind of blend in together and you don't really want that. So in this case, I went for a very thin outline because it gives it, I think, quite a nice effect. Of course, have a play around with it. If it takes your fancy to have more of a thicker line, do absolutely go for it. Gonna go for a step over of 0.25 millimeters, a hatch angle of 45, and I'm gonna fill regionally, and I'm gonna call this one Laser Sketch Griffin. And we'll click on calculate. Wonderful, and let's have a look at that preview for the griffin. Lovely, you can see we get this kind of really cool rustic effect to this. It's a really kind of high fantasy kind of effects going on here, and you can imagine with a bit of finishing on this as well, whether you choose to stain your wood or not, you could really make it look really aged. Let's finish up with some text and some D20 work here. So we're going to go for the laser cut and fill toolpath, and we'll go for the text first, and I'm going to go for the 6-watt laser again. This time I will hatch fill it because I actually want to fill in between the text to really make it pop off of the wood. Okay, so I'm using the same settings as before. Let's call this one laser text. Click on calculate. Let's have a look at the preview. And let's make sure it looks how we want it to do. Wonderful, I'm actually really happy with that. At this stage, you know, if you wanted to increase the power or darken up a bit, this is the stage to do it. This is what the preview's for. Take advantage of the preview before you go to the machine so you can really make sure you're happy with what you're gonna get. So let's go back to the 2D view. And finally, let's go for our last laser toolpath before we go for a cutout. And we're gonna just select our D20. And we're gonna go for a cut on this time. Let's go for laser cut D20, click on calculate. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Click on preview toolpath. Yeah, that looks, I think that looks wonderful. I think it's a really nice addition to that middle there. Just looks a bit less naked. You know, it gives you options for customization. That's the great thing about these dynamic models, is that while the models themselves are great, there's also plenty of room for customization on them as well. So feel free to have a play around with those. Now, finally, we just need to add in a cutout pass, and then we need to go for a profile toolpath. So let's go back to our view here and we'll click on the outside border. This time we can go the full Z depth, so go Z equals 30 mil. So that's Z equals will give me the exact thickness of my material setup. And we'll go for the 1/4 inch end mill. We'll use some tabs to hold it in place. I mean, we don't have to worry about, in this case, the placement too much because we're not having to flip it onto the other side. And we will close that out. Click on calculate after we call this one profile. Actually, in fact, we'll call this one tray cutout, so it's nice and clear. All right, and we'll have a look at the preview for that. And you can see it's cutting around the edges, and eventually you'll see some tabs pop in. There you go, not too big either, so we can just go ahead and chop those off with a saw later on, and it'll make our lives a lot easier when it comes to finishing. So all in all, that is our tray now done, but there is one extra step we need to think about. Now we need to pop back over to the 2D view, and what we need to do is think about how we're going to flip our lid section. Because when we come to actually machine this, we're going to machine the underside, and then we're going to flip it over horizontally onto the other side to our lid. So I'm going to use a dowel method here. So what I'm going to do is put some dowels on the underside here. Going to cut those through, put the dowels in, cut the same dowels into my spoil board because I've got a sacrificial spoil board. And then that means I can know that I can definitely line up my flip. So when I flip it over, the dowels will line up with the holes in the spoil board. They'll be held in tight. I'll make sure everything's screwed down and held down correctly. And it just means when I come to cut it out, everything will line up nice and easy. Okay, so I'm just going to pop some dowels in. So let's close out our preview form, go back over to our design sheet, and we'll go over to draw circle. Now in my case, I've measured my dowels and they're about 7 or 8 mil. They're varying a little bit, but I'm going to go for an 8 mil hole here. I'm going to pop one here, I'm going to pop one here, and I'm going to pop one at the bottom of the sheet just here. Okay, so with the dowel placement, because I've got plenty of kind of material to work with here, what I'm really conscious of is just making sure the end mill doesn't cut for my cutout pass doesn't cut into where the dowel hole is going to be. How do you check that? Well, if you go to toolpath menu, let's just pin that. Let's select this roller cutout toolpath, and you can see the wireframe here, right? But if you click on the top left over here, you can see the visibility by changing it from wireframe to solid. Now this is going to show you the diameter of the actual tool itself. So this is a 0.25 inch end mill, and the blue line here is showing you physically where the end mill is going to go. So you can see I've got plenty of clearance here for my dowels, so I'm all good to go. So it's a really handy tool. I highly recommend you start using, because if it ever comes to things where you need to cut out things on the same sheet, this allows you to see where that end mill is cutting exactly, so you can move your vectors around and place them appropriately. Let's just quickly get some dowel holes made. So let's just go for these, and I'll just turn off that toolpath for a moment. Now it's really important, I'm going to copy these to the other side actually, because I'm going to create the toolpaths for this on the other side as well. So let's go for pockets, and we'll cut these through. And let's just have a look at our tooling. So let's go for roller dowels. Okay, cut all the way through. So those will cut all the way through now. Wonderful. And then we can do the same on the other side. And so we just flip over to the other side. And in fact, what I can do is I can show you a really handy tool, which is copy to other side for the toolpath. So you can right mouse click and copy that toolpath to the other side as well. So let's pop over to the other side. Saves you having to recreate it all from scratch. The only thing you need to watch out for is the software is now telling you, it's giving you a warning. You notice how the toolpath is in italics? It's telling you that you haven't assigned any vectors to it yet. So let's do that. And let's select our dowels. And these are going to be for the spoil board. So we'll call these one spoil board dowels. So the important thing here is when you come to, in fact, let's also adjust the depth for those. I don't want to go that deep with these dowels. So we can go 10 mil deep on the spoil board. We don't want to go all the way through the spoil board. So one tip I'll give you here is that think about your Z0ing. When we come to obviously Z0 for the dowels on the top side, for the underside of the lid here, we're going to be going for the material surface. But you need to think about what you're going to do with your spoil board. So make sure when you zero for your spoil board, you've got your Z0 set in the right place for your dowels. So it's really important that you remember that and keep that in mind. So you can always use a notes feature in the software. If you click on edit and go to notes, you can actually create some notes in the software for yourself. And if you put a full stop or a period at the start of your notes, every time you open the file up, it will pop up with these notes for you. So if you want to give yourself a reminder, that is a really good way to do it. But that covers all of our tool pathing. So now what we're going to do is have a look at how we actually cut this out. So let's have a look at this in action. And this is the finished perfect dice tower. So let's just pop it open. And you'll notice that I've actually got some extra magnets just down here, but don't worry, I've included them in the finished file for you as well. The reason I put those in is just to have a little bit of extra support. So when you're carrying this around in your backpack, for example, the lid won't just fall off. As for the design itself, you can see here, that is included in this UGM bundle. And this is from Design and Make, but don't worry, you get access to this model inside this file. And if you're ever curious as to seeing what other type of model we have out there, go on designandmake.com because there's plenty of designs like this that you might want to include with your own projects. And a final tip for the magnets is that when you're putting the magnets into the wood, put two magnets together first, mark the back of them with a marker pen so you know the polarity is correct when you come to put this together so it doesn't push the magnets apart and brings it all together. But for now, that is the end of our project. Thank you so much for watching and we hope you enjoy the rest of UGM.